Hello, can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me from here? Because it's not very near me, but as long as you can hear me, that's all right. Super. Welcome to the Transport Committee meeting. My name is Susan Hinchcliffe. I'm leader of Bradford and lead for the leaders on transport for West Yorkshire. Shall we just go around and say who we are, where we come from? Who are you?
Dominic Martin, Governance Services Officer.
Councillor Kim Groves from Leeds City Council and lead member for Public Transport at West Yorkshire Combined Authority. That is a long title. Thank you.
Morning everyone, Lou Cunningham, Councillor for Armley Ward.
Councillor Charlie Keith, Wakefield Metropolitan District Council, Ward 21.
Councillor Josh Shaw, Portfolio Holder for Regeneration, Planning and Transport on Bradford Council.
Hi, Councillor James Homewood from Kirklees.
Good morning, Mark Roberts, Private Sector Member, Entrepreneur and Deputy Chair of the LEP.
Good morning everybody, Councillor Rizwana Jamil from Bradford Council.
Councillor Andy Dagon, Executive Member for Transport, City of York Council.
Good morning everyone, Councillor Colin Campbell from Leeds.
Councillor Alan Garbutt from Wakefield, representing Ward 1.
Martin Bolt, Kirklees Council.
Oh, right. No, Councillor Robert Thornber from Calder Council.
Councillor Neil Buckley from Old Woodley Ward here in Leeds.
Councillor Naveed Riaz, Bradford Council.
Helen Allerton, Interim Head of Transport Policy at West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Dave Pearson, Director of Transport and Property Services at the Combined Authority.
Councillor Sunderland, would you like to introduce yourself? As long as it wasn't a fault of the services, that's fine. So that gives us all an opportunity to re-practice the microphones as well, so hopefully now we're all au fait with that, so that's good. So apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Korshik, Councillor Salam, Simon Pringle, Councillor Scullion and Councillor Morley, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I think there's a couple of people still to arrive out there, so if trains delayed, etc. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests. Has anybody any interest they wish to disclose that might come up on this agenda? No? Lovely. Thank you very much. Welcome, Councillor Chowdhury. He's also arrived. And then exempt information. I think there's item 9, isn't it? Appendix 1. So the BSIP plan has been submitted now, hasn't it? So we can actually discuss that. It's just further appendices we can't.
That's right, Chair. It's in the public domain now, so it's free to be discussed without excluding the press or the public.
And that was circulated earlier this week, so you should have a copy of that if you haven't already. And then minutes of the meeting of the Transport Committee held on the 17th of September. Are there any sort of comments, questions people want to make on those? Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. On page 7 of the minutes, on item 23 last time, we reflected on the shortage of HGV drivers and also the need for better welfare facilities. As you're aware, Chair, following the meeting, I wrote to unite the union and the head office of the Road Haulage Association, copied yourself into that, asking if they'd be interested in coming together and discussing improving facilities for HGV drivers. Sadly, neither of them responded. As I'm sure many are aware, the good news is that there's apparently £32.5 million now in the budget nationally to improve driver welfare, and I hope, Chair, that we in West Yorkshire can look at getting some bids in for this so we can improve the facilities. As I said last time, I've seen the ones in Kirklees, and paying £10 to park on a piece of tarmac without any toilets is despicable, so we ought to be looking at what we can do to make the facilities better for HGV drivers in West Yorkshire.
Thank you, Councillor Bolt. I thought we had it somewhere on the agenda, actually, to talk about HGV drivers, but it is actually in the Transport Network update, isn't it, I suppose, next, which we can bring it up in. I'm sure we can chase down a response of, obviously they're quite busy, HGV drivers, and those people representing them at the moment, aren't they? I'm sure that's just an administrative oversight. But is it over 32 million for nationally? That's not a lot of money, is it, to be quite honest? You know, if we yeah, but it just shows, I mean, that's a national problem as well, isn't it? They're not valuing the profession enough. It's only 32 million nationally they're putting aside for this. You're absolutely right. It is a really important issue, and we need to support those drivers because they've just been shown to be such an integral part of how our economy works. But 32 million doesn't scrape the sides, does it? So we should actually, thank you for highlighting that, we need to be writing to government asking for more, actually. Councillor Bolt, did you want to come back?
Yeah, obviously the scale of the problem, again, when I was driving, there were probably half a dozen decent facilities. But if there's 32 million nationally, if that's put in partnership with an operator, with a local authority, with the unions, with the industry, then it can become something. But certainly, whatever it is, while people are looking at it, you know, so let's get our name in the frame so that West Yorkshire can be looking at as a pilot project, Chair.
Thank you. I'm sure we already cited on that, but we'll cover it in the next item. Anything else on the minutes or any comments, questions? Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. It was on page 4 of the minutes, actually. There will be an opportunity to discuss this later on, but just to flag this issue up, the reference there to driver shortages. And just to say briefly that I was talking to, well, first of all, the number of private hire drivers in the city has gone down by about, here in Leeds, has gone down by about 700. Anecdotally, they're talking about other companies such as Amazon and that kind of thing, offering £20 an hour and so forth. So just to flag that up, Chair, I'm sure we can bring this in a little bit later on.
Yeah, that was a national news item this morning, actually, as well. The National Private Hire Association is saying exactly the same thing, that nationally they are seeing a shortage of private hire drivers now. So absolutely, it is an issue which I'm sure we'll all share in that discussion. Lovely. With that, then, anything else? Lovely. Okay. So there's obviously a couple of matters arising we'll cover elsewhere in the agenda, but if we're happy with that, can we just say also in favour of accepting those minutes as an accurate record of the meeting? Please. Thank you very much. Thank you. That is carried. Moving on then to the next item on the agenda, which is Transport Network Update. I believe. Oh no, it's not. Forgive me. I'm just checking you were paying attention then on it. Notes the joint DCSC meeting on the 26th of August. And now this turned into really, it was an opportunity to do a bit of a consultation on BSIP and bus improvement, etc. So it was actually quite a useful meeting to formulate what actually went into government in the end. So this has moved on, obviously, given we've got now on here the submission that went to government. Does anybody have anything on here to remark on, or are we okay to accept this as a correct record and discuss BSIP when it comes in the agenda? They're just for noting, apparently, so that's fine. We've noted them. Lovely, thank you. So now we do move on to the substantive item on the agenda about Transport Network Update, and we do have driver shortages on this in this paper. Dave, did you want to introduce this paper?
Yes, Chair, and this is the paper where we bring you up to speed with how the transport network's performing and the various challenges that we do have. And as members have already highlighted, in terms of public transport, shortage of bus drivers is having an effect on the delivery of the service. I think we reported this at the last meeting because it's quite an immediate issue at the last meeting in terms of the situation. having discussed with bus operators this week, I think that the situation is still quite a live issue. It's probably not any worse than it was a month ago, but it's certainly not any better. And so operators have taken several actions to reduce some of their outputs. That has impacted on a higher rate of cancellations of service, and in some cases some reductions of timetables. And in the case of Arriva, they've actually made some service changes as well at the end of October to slightly shrink their output down to meet what they can achieve in terms of driver availability. I'm advised some of the issues around licensing and testing are easing, and that makes it a little bit better in terms of the ability to get new starters onto the road quickly, but it's still a live issue. I think, as Councillor Buckley and others and Councillor Bolt have pointed out, this isn't just a bus issue. There's an issue around HGV drivers, taxi, private hire. The Mayor held a round table with representatives of the haulage and bus industries on the 12th of October to look at various activities that both the Combined Authority can do in terms of supporting the situation and the industry, and how people can work together to address that. And there's some actions taken away to be able to do that locally, because I think it's recognised that there's both a short-term immediate issue around the work, the labour market, and how people are moving away from driving jobs in some of this sector to other jobs. And there's also a longer-term issue, particularly in the HGV and the bus driving sectors, about age of workforce, working conditions, those sort of issues. Aside from that, I think we are seeing a slow recovery from the pandemic impact on public transport use, and public transport use is hovering around 70 to 75% of what we would normally expect in October at the moment. So I think we've still got some way to go to recover that, and as you would imagine, that therefore has some financial implications both for the transport industry and for the Combined Authority, in terms of we're still very much managing within the emergency funding envelope that both the Combined Authority has set and government has set to keep bus services going as much as possible. On the rail side, there's a similar level of recovery of rail patronage. Both across all public transport, we're seeing that to be more in the weekend and perhaps the sort of leisure journey market. I think the main thing that isn't building up is the office-based commuters in towns and city centres, the areas of activity that people are not on public transport as much as they were. I'll stop there, Chair, because there's a lot of information detail in the report, and Helen and I can reply to any points that members have.
And it sounds like the Mayor's one step ahead of us with the HGV drivers, if you're already talking about welfare in a round table. I mean, how you, obviously, Councillor Bolt asked a question about this 32 million, which obviously is a derisory amount, but are we trying to get our 30 grand, or however much we might be able to get?
In all honesty, don't quite know the detail around that, and it was an announcement in last week's budget, so we'll get a little bit more information and make members aware of it.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Councillor Thornber, sorry, thank you.
Right, I think you've covered it, Dave, but it were a comment on regarding licensing. I think testing drivers is maybe out of our control, but regarding licensing and issuing licenses, that's something we should be able to speed up if we can. Are you able to clarify that?
In terms of bus drivers, that's with essentially the DVLA and the Vehicle Standards Agency who issue the bus driving licences. Clearly, the local authorities are all licensing authorities for acting private hire. So, and I'm not aware there's a problem there. I haven't heard there's a problem in terms of the licensing. I think the problem with the DVLA is that they had a number of difficulties throughout the pandemic in terms of their backlog developed. And they had some issues, some staffing issues, which I think fairly well reported as well. So they went into this problem with a backlog, and I think that's been the problem. But I think there have been ways of trying to speed their processes up to be able to get that throughput of licensing moving a bit better.
Thank you. Councillor Groves?
Yeah, I think there is a problem. One of our operators said yesterday that they've had 100 applications, but they're still stuck in the system. But I think it brings a wider point up in terms of an ageing workforce as well, and future-proofing and planning in front. And it's a good opportunity for the bus industry to really have a good look at its terms and conditions and how it can attract people to the market. Because Arriva have been on the radio all week, crying out for people to come and join the industry. So I think it's an opportunity. I think we should write to government to ask, what is the backlog and where are we with it? Because obviously, wherever it's that they're not getting those licences processed, there's people who could have jobs and want jobs, and I think that's a bigger conversation. I think in terms of Councillor Bolt's point on HGVs, hopefully we hope that, that freight will take over a lot of deliveries, but I think in the long term, we've got to be looking for some sites that future consolidation centres and stopping them travelling that last mile into towns and cities. And I think that's about maybe which district can do that and which district might have the capacity also then to have an electric charging site or a hydrogen site. So I think there's a lot of work to do on that, Martin, but like Councillor Hinchcliffe said, there's not a lot of money there to do it, and I think it's about how you bring all those industries together to try and make that work.
Thank you, Councillor Groves. That's a good point about actually making sure we're asking government about their plans for HGV drivers. But it's not just HGVs, as we've just discussed today. There's a whole raft of driver shortages that we need to be projecting into the future. So can we broaden that out and just ask a bit of information about backlogs and about local resilience as well, about any local testing sites and centres, and obviously our own skills programmes. We're all here as local authority members and have skills programmes which I'm sure we can adapt for the current demand. Councillor Keith?
Thank you, Chair. There's a number of points on it and observations and anecdotal evidences that's coming to me over the last few months that the movement away from HGVs because of the shortage of drivers means that we're going to be having a lot more prevalence of white van man running about. If anybody's tried to buy a second-hand van at the moment, the prices are nearly the same as a new one. So we're saying with one thing, we're trying to get a coordinated transport policy, but the situation is that it's going the other way. There's going to be a prevalence of those on the road. I'm also got a concern about anecdotal evidence that's been coming to me that said that now they're going to try and get these HGV drivers through the test by weakening the test. I can remember when we used to call lorry drivers the knights of the road. I'm just concerned that we're going to be in this rush for people to come into an industry which is now becoming very profitable to come into, that they might be rushed through. I'm concerned about the quality of training. But the main impact is that I heard some weeks ago that 70 drivers had left Arriva to go drive lorries because they haven't got to work the antisocial hours, they haven't got to, delivering for Sainsbury's starts at such and then finishes at others, or other supermarkets are available. But what I'm saying is that they're moving the work because of the hours that they already have on those. But it's the impact then on the end user. If your first experience, if we're trying to get people back onto public transport and your first experience is a bad one, followed by a second experience of a bad one because the bus doesn't turn up because you haven't got a driver, then you're going to turn your back on it and you're going to go back. And it's that's going to have the long-term impact because people will resort to jumping in the car and using that because the public transport isn't giving them what they want. Thank you.
Thank Thank you. All good points. And I just wonder if in the letter we can make a point about just reassuring ourselves about the quality control. I think that's probably quite important.
I think it is. I think from what I've seen, that it's process rather than the standard of testing that they're trying to speed up. But yeah, that point does need to be made quite strongly.
I think the other thing, obviously, is working conditions, which is what you raised, in terms of, the bus industry, as I understand it now, is quite inflexible in terms of, part-time working and flexible hours. And I'm afraid they are going to have to move to more modern working conditions to attract the right.
Yes, I think that's recognised. We've started to have those conversations. I think there is a structural issue around sending a bus and a driver out on the road for X number of hours to meet a schedule. You have to almost go back to those schedules to be able to build in the flexible working. So to a certain extent, it is quite fundamental in the whole system to actually change the system to be able to achieve flexible working. But I think everybody recognise the fact that whilst the immediate issue, and I have heard anecdotally that some people who've gone to be lorry drivers have come back because it's not quite what they expected. But I think there's also the recognition that the age of the workforce and the profile of the workforce needs to change because that's what's making it not very resilient, and that's the same in HGVs as well as bus driving.
Thank you. Councillor Homewood.
Thank you. Probably a silly question, and I think I'm just getting confused. But on the rail network update, 2.11, it talks about so it's talking about Northern. It says levels, passenger levels 75% compared to pre-COVID levels, and then it says about commuter levels being 38%. Is that 38% of all journeys, or 38% of pre-COVID levels? Because I was getting confused and I couldn't work out how it could be 75% if it was pre-COVID levels of commuting was only 30%.
I think what's been done throughout the pandemic is to compare things to 2019 as a sort of norm. I think how that works is that the 75% is the overall number of people coming through the network. Then they will have sampled some peak time trains and looked at the numbers on there, and that's why you've got a slight difference between the 38 and the 75. I think one of the things that is quite noticeable on the rail network is that generally the trains are busier than sometimes they used to be at Saturdays and Sundays, and can be in the early evening, but the morning peak is significantly less, and that shows you that there's one cohort of passengers not there in the numbers that there were before, and I think that's what those statistics are showing.
Sorry, I know it's a boring point, but what I wasn't sure about was is that 38% referring to 38% of pre-COVID levels, or is it 30% of all passengers are commuters?
38% compared with pre-COVID levels,
and we're still have 75%. That must mean there's a significant increase then in non-commuting travel purposes. Yeah, very significant, I would have thought. I just wondered how that's been considered, in the wider. We're talking about all of the things going back to pre-COVID levels in terms of services, but are the services at the right times? I'm just wondering
that's a really good point, because in what this probably says is that by looking at what they determine in that statement, commuter levels, they are tending to look at the traditional peak times. And I think one of the things that is noticeable is that what commuting is taking place isn't necessarily going to be in the peak times, because people are working more flexibly. So I think this moves to a slightly different view as to what peak time is and isn't, and the fact that it's a good consistent service frequency across the whole day and across the whole week is probably what's needed, whereas before the pandemic, you tend to put a lot of resource into the 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock and the 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock periods, and on trains, that's when the extra trains were added into the timetable to meet the demand. Coming out of this, that might not be the most appropriate way of doing it, and trying to use those trains across the day better, rather than concentrate them at the start and finish of the day.
It's not where it's going to settle down as, isn't it, really? And I think that's a real challenge because people say, obviously, leisure's coming back faster than work travel. But at the same time, I think from January onwards, things will start changing again from a work point of view. But I'd be reluctant for services to be changed for now as to post in the future. But it's just knowing when, isn't it, really? It is going to change things inevitably, isn't it? But it just... Yeah. Interesting. Councillor Bolt and Councillor Hayden.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The discussion about the movement from HGV to other, I think, is something that we need to have an eye on, because I'm aware that in Kirklees on the Bradford border, there's plans afoot for a very large Amazon distribution depot, and I believe there's also one in Leeds at Tingley, which brings its own problems then, that we're transferring HGV movements in with multiple van movements out onto local roads, and therefore looking at our carbon emission reduction pathway work that we're doing, we need to have a look and see how that impacts on congestion, air quality, CO2, etc. It seems, well, it's a boom business for them. They've got Doncaster, South Ferriby, I said there's one at Tingley, and certainly one at Chain Bar, which is right on the border there, so need to be keeping an eye on that. Just looking at the report on page 33, some of the data, insights into transport network use. There's a graph and some text about cycle counts, and just reading it appears to contradict itself, because it says off-road cycle counts are often attributed to leisure trips. Then later on, it's talking about, conversely, trips have increased this year as people return to walk places, as seen at sites, and it includes Huddersfield Canal as one of them, which is an off-road cycle route. So the report is saying that, on the one hand, commuter trips are increasing because Huddersfield Canal is going up, but the entry says it's often attributed to leisure trips. The other thing that I'm aware of in Kirklees is that many of our counters on the active travel networks haven't been working for some while because either the batteries went flat or we've got nobody to analyse the data. So I don't know if we can pull a report forward for the future about how and where we are monitoring our active travel network, so because it's going to come up later when we're talking about some of the Merrill Pledges. Yeah, we need to have active data.
Thank you, Councillor. But if you want to, David, just pick up the question about the report that he's raising, but I think obviously we have an active travel working group, don't we? So that is absolutely the right place to discuss the data that's available. So can we make sure that Councillor Korshik has that on her agenda? Are you part of that, Councillor Bolt? Yeah, we probably are, actually. We're all quite interested in it, aren't we? So, yes, Dave. Yeah, it's a very small graph. You must have very good eyesight, Councillor Bolt. Councillor Hayden.
Right. I don't normally have to do that when we're in council, do I? Yeah, so normally it's done for us. A couple of things. Firstly, on the transport focus surveys and the wearing of masks in particular, which was talked about earlier on, that although bus and rail companies are still asking people to wear masks, it's very, very low, the amount of masks. And on 2.3, it says 58% of non-users of buses and 64% of non-users would feel safe if they had to make a journey on bus or rail. That seems quite low, and I understand where they're coming from. I mean, I'm not particularly anxious about, COVID or anything else, but I got the bus into Leeds today, and there was a lady behind me coughing quite a lot, and it does make you feel a bit, so I decided to feel sorry for her instead of getting upset. And I'm not particularly, and I wore my mask, so I'm thinking, well, I'm doing what I can do. And I suppose it's legislation or something but whether we can, to get those numbers that will feel safe, because I do know people who won't use the bus or bus in particular because of not feeling particularly safe. On a more positive note, the M-Card app and the ability to gift tickets is fantastic. So Thank you very much. As somebody whose daughter's just started high school, my ability to gift her a ticket and things like that is just brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Noting your comments about the M card, I think that is a particular success in these papers, isn't it? I think we all note that. But it's a very good point about mask wearing. Obviously, it's not enforceable anymore, is it? But can we do some more advertising?
It isn't. I mean, we did in the summer when the restrictions were lifted. We still maintained the need to wear a face mask in the bus stations, and we still do. It's quite difficult to enforce, and we do quite a lot of communications. We can do more to reinforce the message, but I think people have got it in their head. The people who don't wear masks have got it in their head that they don't need to unless they're told to. So I think in some respects it probably does need a national approach to it, which doesn't seem to be forthcoming.
Yeah, none of us have got any powers anymore to enforce things, have we, from a COVID pandemic point of view? But it does feel like, it's just the respectful thing to do, isn't it, on public transport, to wear a mask?
Yes.
And it's getting people into the habit of feeling that's what you should do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And just taking the previous comments and Councillor Hayden's comments, and I fully appreciate the logic of what she says and what Dave has said. Just to make the opposite point, in that there will almost in perpetuity now be a cohort of people, in my view, who feel unsafe. And in a way, society in general runs the risk of perpetuating this feeling of fear. And just to make the opposite point, there is this group of people who will tend to feel fear and want to wear a mask on public transport and other places and so on. But there is also another cohort of people who might be thinking to themselves, this morning I might catch the bus, but there's no shelter, so I might get wet. It's very windy, so I'm going to get cold. And actually, I've got to wear a mask. And it's just one other negative for that cohort. So that's just to make the opposite point, Chair.
Also, we need to make it as easy for people as possible, don't we, to comply and make sure that they think about these things in advance. But I think it's a wider debate, isn't it, really, about what the pandemic has done to us in terms of fear. And I think it's not just mask wearing that makes people fear. It's a whole range of things now that people are fearful of. Mental illness, obviously, has increased nationally as well. And that is making people fearful to go out, even. And, I'm not sure the mask contributes greatly to that. It is a bit of a malaise that we've got in society as a result of the pandemic, which actually was already there a little bit, but has been accentuated now, I think. And so it's a wider debate, probably, for a Health and Wellbeing Committee as well as a Transport Committee, actually. Mark Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. And just linking those points together, actually, with an insight that I think comes in the paper at point 2.30. I note that, they say 86% of bus passengers feel safe. But actually only 58% of non-users feel safe, and the same trends are mirrored for rail. And so I wonder actually at a West Yorkshire level whether we might be best incentivised to try to encourage that trial, to see when people go from non-users to actually trying, they do feel safe, and that begins to sort of change the habits. And I note the Free Bus Sunday recent initiative, and just wonder if there could potentially be other things we could do to try to encourage both trial and also then users feeling safer. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's all about making it easier, isn't it? So the Free Bus Sunday was a tremendous success, wasn't it, actually? I think the Mayor obviously increased bus patronage.
Yeah, we estimate it increased a typical Sunday bus patronage by about 13%, which considering how bad the weather was in the morning, isn't too bad. So that I think that's right. I think that there is a job to give people who don't use public transport the confidence to use it, and and to address some of the issues that public transport has done to make it safer. So we've had conversations about cleaning buses and trains that we would never have had before, and fogging machines and all of those things, those precautions that are being taken, and which will always be the case, because I think one of the things the pandemic will leave is a different customer perception and less tolerance of overcrowding, more awareness of the need for space around people and the need for cleanliness. And I think that's one of the things which will last, I would think, longer than the immediacy of the pandemic. Is these are the customer factors people are looking for now.
Thank you. So we're asked to note the report. Obviously, we've gone through wide-ranging issues there, from HGV drivers, taxi drivers, slow overall recovery from COVID, of course, and the M-card, and mask wearing on transport. So obviously there's a lot going on in this transport space, and I'm sure we'll come back to a lot of those. And there's some working groups work to take up from that discussion as well.
We'll keep members up to date with how things are going.
Thank you very much. Lovely. Well, in that case, we'll move on to the next item, which is on future mobility strategy. This is going to be presented by Helen, I think, isn't it? Helen, do you want to take this introductory remark?
Thank you, Chair. So the future mobility strategy has come here today really for discussion. Just as a bit of background on this, it was first written and consulted last year and considered as part of the wider connectivity strategy engagement earlier this year. It is one of the daughter documents of the connectivity strategy. Since it was written, a lot has happened. We've continued in COVID, and the bus service improvement plan was written, and therefore what we want to do now is we're just currently reviewing the future mobility strategy in the context of all of that, and to kind of just understand therefore which bits we need to bring up to date, basically. So we're bringing it back here as a bit of an opportunity to continue some of that conversation. I think the original purpose of the strategy was to really establish kind of an opportunity to look at new technology and kind of innovation in transport. So it particularly focuses on the use of demand-responsive transport services, mobility hubs, car clubs, first and last mile freight, mobility as a service. So quite a range of opportunities there. You'll know, if you've had a chance to look at the bus service improvement plan in the last week, that we are looking to develop further our demand-responsive transport offer through BSIP by looking at doing a further 5, subject to funding this is of course, doing a further 5 demand-responsive transport offers across West Yorkshire, and looking at delivering further mobility hubs as well. So that really gives us an opportunity to kind of develop that part of this strategy, but then other parts of the strategy will look to work further through other opportunities. And then really the recommendation in this report following that discussion, or following this discussion, is that it will go as part of the approval for the connectivity strategy into the December combined authority. So I think it's just probably worth me noting that the connectivity strategy in terms of its engagement, and we are currently working on the outputs of that engagement to present that through to the combined authority in December. Thank you.
So some exciting things in here. I know a few of us talked about the actual name of this future mobility strategy, because we do feel it's a little bit disingenuous. It does sound a little bit like, you know, mobility in terms of accessibility of transport. So obviously it's a lot broader than that, although obviously that should be a key plank of it, actually enable people with access issues to access the network more easily. Any questions or comments on this? Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As you say, it's a very exciting time to this, looking forward and looking at recommendations and suggestions for what the Combined Authority may consider in their deliberations. On page 54, the future mobility objectives, the modal shift targets, I think are something I'd like to see some meat put on the bones for this. That the Mayor has said that transport and other schemes which are not supportive of the overall challenges, targets, things that we're working for, may see their funding from the authority cut. So I think we should be seeing in major schemes, as they work up their business cases, evidence of how they hope to attain, and we'll be talking about later things like the carbon emission pathway and things. If they can't evidence that they're going to work towards our objectives, then the funding ought to be scrutinised. Because on page 59 of the report, the transport objectives and the transport strategy sets ambitious midpoint targets. And I noticed that on this we're talking about a 3.5% reduction of car journeys, but the carbon emission reduction pathway, which we previously approved, talked about a 21% shift. And similarly, 300% more trips by bike, I think that was a 2,000%. So hopefully we can collate, unless it's me that's missed those figures somewhere on the short-term ones. But projects ought to be showing how they are going to be working towards that and towards emission reduction and other things. On page 61, the Merrill Pledge, 5,000 new homes. Well, as Eric knows, we've got 4,000 of those on Dewsbury Riverside. The infrastructure for which is lamentably poor. We, as an authority, are supporting the new Ravensthorpe railway station, which Network Rail have said they're not going to provide any more car parking spaces than the old railway station, which had about 5 parking spaces on a street. And that's immediately adjacent to the Dewsbury Riverside. Network Rail have said if you want more car parking spaces, this authority or Kirklees has to provide them. And similarly, I'm not sure if, as part of the Riverside, we're going to be seeing bus services routed and taking people to where they want to be, such as employment and education locators. But, yeah, we need to be factoring those in. And the other point I noted on this was on page 73, and it may be a typographical, I mean, it talks about topography, but it may be typography. Topography of the city can be an influence. For those of us who don't live in a city, can we be included in this strategy? I mean, all it needs to say is topography can be an influence. It doesn't have to limit it to cities. I mean, obviously, Bradford and Leeds and Wakefield are in that fortunate position, but for those of us who aren't, we still have topography, and it's still challenging. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's not much you can do about those hills either, is there? That's the other thing. The hills are all over the place, aren't they, regardless of cities, etc. But I guess that what they're saying is that most of the emissions are emitted in cities, aren't they? That's where the concentration of vehicles are. So I dare say that's the point they're making. And I think it does actually say, isn't it, like the targets of those are going to be revised. So it says that in the text. So I think that's probably likely to happen. Helen, did you want to come in on those points?
I was just going to come back on those transport strategy targets. That's from the transport strategy in 2017 and the midpoint targets, and obviously since then we've had a few things going on. So there may be an opportunity over coming year to kind of look at that and reposition that.
On page 46, you've got a paragraph there, keeping women and girls safe. Could you elaborate a bit more on this, please?
Yeah, so women and girls is one of the key aims of the Mayor, and through the Merrill Pledges, and looking to try and ensure the safety of women and girls travelling on public transport and otherwise moving around. So we have included that as a consideration within the Future Mobility Strategy to ensure we work towards making that clear in here.
I don't know if this is the right time to ask this, but given what the circumstances, what's been going on, what's currently being done to improve the safety of women and young girls?
So do you mean on the public transport network? So it's down to Transport Police, presumably, and PCSOs, etc.?
Yes, I mean, I think the reason why it sits in this strategy is there's more that can be done. But to give an example, British Transport Police and the rail industry have a very live campaign at the moment to basically remind people that unwanted attention and wanted sexual attention is something that is unacceptable on the railways. So there's a very strong hitting campaign. We're looking to extend that into the bus network as well to reinforce that. I think some of this in this strategy here is also about looking at how we might use things like the Hackney and private hire licensing, and how we might use apps and other technology opportunities to provide a bespoke service that people feel safer using. So I think there are opportunities in this mobility strategy to try and bespoke certain things that help people feel safer. I think that's basically where what it sits in within this strategy for.
Basically, I think it's a real opportunity. Now we've got the Mayor has got police and transport, and we've never had that before, and I think that's a real opportunity to complement the agenda and make sure it's stronger. Councillor Groves, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so the rail industry have been on this for many years. They do the Rail to Refuge. So if a woman is experiencing domestic violence, they will provide free transport to the place that they're going to go, whether that be another town or another city. All the rail operators, in terms of, it's just not about women, do an awful lot of work around suicide prevention, and there's a whole host of things that they don't really talk about as an industry, which is a little bit sad because they do a lot of that work. I think bus is slightly behind on this, if I'm honest, and I think as districts we've got a challenge because actually, you know, we've never had the maintenance funding for, regardless of who's been in government, for people who are cycling and walking, and all those routes we've put in do need lighting, so there's a big role to play to keep everybody safe. It's never going to be 100% because of our districts, how they are. Some of the bus stops, you know, are in hedgerows, so I think it's about technology and apps, and we certainly at Leeds City Council do have an app that we can press if we're in a dangerous situation. So I think it's about technology playing a big part in this, but please do look at what the rail industry do, because they're doing a phenomenal amount of work on this.
Just to add to Councillor Grove's point about Rail to Refuge, we have very recently included bus in that now by incorporating the M card. So we've a way in which people can get hold of an M card to use the bus to flee domestic violence as well.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor Buckley, did you have a question? No. Yes. Yeah.
I thought you'd missed me out. It was on public consultation, actually, and I noticed that the number of responses was 593, which in the context of West Yorkshire is very, very low. And obviously, officers won't be happy with that. So what plans can be actually enacted to get this response rate up? Because the 500 and something, really, once you've taken away the people who have a vested interest in the subject in one way or another, there can hardly be any public consultation in there.
Can you just come back to the name? I think the name probably puts people off, because they won't know what it's for.
It's worth me just picking up on that point. So that was, just to be clear, that was when it was consulted on in its kind of self last year. It was then also wrapped up within the consultation around, or engagement, shall I say, around the connectivity strategy earlier this year, for which I can't remember the exact number, over 5,000 something, or there wasn't over 5,000, but it was actually the biggest type of consultation response that we've had of that type for the combined authority. So that's why I'm almost saying we're taking that kind of the feedback from that engagement as part of the consultation for this particular strategy.
We shall take that away.
Thank you.
And make suggestions.
I've got Councillor de Gorn and I've got Councillor Homewood and then Councillor Hayden.
Thank you. On the page 46, we've just been looking at the bullet points there, future mobility strategy, all very good. It may be somewhere else in the report, but particularly interesting was a note at the bottom of the page there about impact of reducing crime and reference to experience in London. I think if we've got sort of claims, we ought to have, if there's a report or whatever, some specific reference as a footnote to that. That would be useful for people to be able to validate the claims that are in the report.
Fine. We just go to the other questions, and then we'll come back to that. Councillor Homewood, did you want to?
Yeah, it was just on the mobility hubs. I was reading through that, and I think they sound like a really good thing. And I just noticed it was talking about where they would be targeted in terms of places of employment and that sort of thing. One of the things I was just going to say is I don't know whether we have an overlay here on things like areas of deprivation and things like that, because I think thinking about smaller schemes as well, in somewhere like where I represent, I'm sure others are the same, a lot of people don't have access to cars, bikes, particularly electric bikes, because they just can't afford to have that sort of maintenance. So I think we should maybe make an overlay of what we're doing in areas where we do have deprivation, where we have less access to transport. I think, you know, a great thing if you've got mobility hubs in the centre of Leeds, but actually you've got people in their communities who aren't getting access to those sorts of services. So it's just, I was just going to suggest, you know, do we have that kind of thought? I don't know where the sites are that have been proposed so far, but just an idea. I think those kind of smaller schemes of having people access to bikes and things like that they can rent or use for free or whatever it might be, linked to kind of community centres and community groups and things like that would be really useful.
Councillor Hayden.
Just a point on the safety issue that we were talking about. It's another advantage of the on-demand flexibus trial that's happening in East Leeds, because you don't have to walk to a bus stop and stand there, as you said, and it will come to your home. But everybody's registered. You can't get on the bus until you've registered, either phoned up or registered. So it's I know that because it serves my area of Leeds, that a lot of elderly people, a lot of women are loving it and feeling very safe to use it. And I think that's kind of the way forward in terms of lots of things.
No, it's a good point. I take that as a comment, but I think obviously we're all watching how that goes in Leeds, and I think we've all got our own plans for similar schemes in the districts. Councillor Sunderland now wants to come in, and then I'll go to Dave.
Thank you. I was going to come into the last debate about safety, but actually I thought it's moved on in this one. And for me, when I get comments back about feeling safe on public transport, it predominantly is safety at night, particularly around bus stops or on trains. And I did wonder if in the last debate that percentage of people who didn't feel safe on transport was relating to that. And obviously, as our mayor's picked that out as a top priority, I think that there definitely will be a substantial proportion of people who don't feel safe, particularly for that reason. And I think there are a number of things that we can do, and there's a number of areas where we have influence on the debate. I think before on the discussions around guards on trains, for example, or perhaps the use of CCTV on trains and bus stops, that things that we could push that could actually make a significant difference to people who want to use those modes of transport. Just in relation to that, perhaps this is something I've missed before, but I noticed the top objective refers to a gender-neutral strategy, and the top objective refers to a gender-neutral transport network. I just wondered what you meant by that and how that relates to the clear gender-based issues that have been drawn out, particularly by the Mayor, where there is a specific issue around keeping women and girls safe.
Before we go to that, I've got Mark Roberts now, and that is the last one then before I go to...
Thank you, Chair. And a very brief point. Potentially apart from the name aside, I think there's lots of good thinking in this paper. I think from a business perspective, I'd just like to emphasise or ask for a little more emphasis on productivity whilst travelling. I think especially when we're trying to encourage commuters to give up cars and travel, I think that productivity benefit there is useful. And you know, if networks like London can get high-speed Wi-Fi into tubes, then as part of this levelling up agenda, I think having access to high-speed connections on the buses and trains all over West Yorkshire is really important for us to be talking about and asking for.
So Helen is not David.
Okay, thank you. I think, yes, thank you, Mark. That's definitely something that we will look to bring in there a bit more. Just on the gender neutral point, so through the conversations with the bus service improvement plan, it was making sure that the bus service improvement was inclusive of all groups and working through the mayor's language around gender. You'll notice the bus service improvement plan then talks about inclusivity in the wider point, and that needs to now reflect into the future mobility strategy. So that point will get picked up. So and then the other one, just on the link to around the mobility hubs, yes, we do have a long list of sites, and they have been matched to deprivation is one of the criteria they've been matched to. We haven't done any prioritisation or anything around those at the moment because they are just a list to see where funding allows us to go. And then on the crime and safety point around kind of yes, that will be noted in there as a reference. There was a piece of research that was linked to, but I can see that it hasn't got the footnote onto it. They were the main points from the latest discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, yes, Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you. Could I just bring in a point about general road safety as well, and to see how this strategy is linking in with our killed and seriously injured strategy plans?
The Mayor and Deputy Mayor of Police have got a Vision Zero strategy now, so it should link in with that. Are we conscious? Obviously, it's a policing side of the combined authority, but this paper should be cited on that, as Councillor Cunningham said.
Yes, so that we want to kind of look at that in the round, kind of the wider connectivity strategy level, and then how that filters down accordingly. So yes, that will be considered.
Thank you, Chair. Just to remind you that in the not too distant past, we're talking about areas of deprivation. We did do some work with the Roundtrees Foundation. Kim will remember it well. So there is some information out there. Maybe you need to just look at that again. Thank you.
Councillor Campbell, isn't
it? Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that a number of us are visitors to Leeds and visitors to the council chamber, and you will be appreciating the fantastic acoustics within this particular room, which is of course why we put the microphones in. These microphones are specifically designed to pick your voice up when you're standing up. So unfortunately, people who look round to the person who's asked them a question and talk to them, those of us over here who are slightly hard of hearing can't hear what you've said. Sorry, but could I just ask, if you're going to ask a question or comment, can you point your mouth at the microphone, please?
Yes, it's a very good point. Thank you. Yes, we must all be mindful of that. So let's make sure we make these a bit closer to us so it's a bit easier for people to hear. That's what they're there for. So with that then, I would like us in the report that goes to the Combined Authority with this, to obviously to note the comments of the Transport Committee so members of the Combined Authority can hear the feedback that has been made at this committee. I think there's been some very constructive points made this morning that the Combined Authority should be cited on, just to make sure those are accommodated in the strategy. And with that then, we recommend this to go forward to the Combined Authority for consideration. I think that's the question that had been asked, isn't it, today? So can I see all those in favour, please show? That is carried. Thank you very much for that. So moving on now to Rail Strategy Capacity Chapter. When I first saw this, I thought it was going to be the Freemasons, but I don't think it is it?
No, thank you. So this report is kind of setting out the first part of the rail strategy, which is looking at the capacity section. The report in here is just for noting and to update the committee on where we are with the rail strategy. Within here, we're looking at both the capacity on the network and on the trains, and kind of what that leads us to in terms of what we feel we need next, in terms of in terms of increased capacity requirements. It's also just really to set out that we'll be looking at 2 workshops with Transport Committee. One to look at a number of areas within the rail strategy, so particularly around capacity, around freight, and other areas that are noted in the report in table 2.9. And then also to say that there'll be a second workshop to look at the rail strategy for approval later on in March, before the final strategy then comes for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, this, for me, this links a little bit back to the item earlier about HGVs and the freight capacity. You know, we should be using freight capacity, shouldn't we? I know that's something Councillor Gross goes on a lot, especially with electrification, leading to our carbon reduction targets. So there's certainly a lot to do on this, and obviously lots of asks on here as well. Obviously, we're all waiting to see about what's going to be announced in the IRP, which always seems to be next week. But it never is. Next week never comes. So I think it's now the week after. So we'll have to see about when that is. Has anybody got any questions or comments on this? Councillor Homewood.
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, I think firstly, just to say, I think it's really good to have set out there all that investment that we need for the capacity, and I think it really kind of sends a message as well to the government about this commitment to levelling up just how much investment is needed in order to deliver that just in the rail and transport areas. I appreciate this is to do with capacity, but I just wanted to not miss the opportunity just to say one of the things that came out of our sub-district committee in Kirklees, and it's been mentioned quite often, is the importance of all these things linking in with accessibility as well. And I'm sure that's the same across the district. About we have lots of stations that are not accessible to people with disabilities and things like that. And that's something we need to be thinking about when these schemes are coming forward, that we're building that in, because at the moment we've said lots of times, well, Transpennine upgrade will deliver that, but then it's not happening and things like that. So, yeah, I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to raise that.
It's something that comes up in Kirklees a lot, actually. I don't know if it's a specific issue there, obviously, with the trains. I know the Mayor talks about Batley Station a lot. Councillor Gross.
I totally agree about accessibility, and we do go for every fund that comes up, but it's dependent on government funding. And if the funding continues in the way it has done in the past, it'll be 70 years before every station in the UK is accessible, which is shocking.
Absolutely, in this age of inclusivity and health inequalities, honestly, we need to be faster than that, don't we? Councillor Bolt, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. On page 109, there's reference to the Transpennine route upgrade, which unfortunately we haven't got any further detail in updates about where that is progressing and whether the issues are being resolved. And it talks there about the completion date of 2026. And on Tuesday, both James and I were addressing a Kirklees Scrutiny Committee relating to major roadworks which this authority is funding at Cooper Bridge, so Calderdale and Kirklees, which is projected to be taking place at the same time. So I think we need to have an overview of if there are major roadworks ongoing at Cooper Bridge, one of the strategic links between it comes off junction 25 of the M62, so people will be accessing Wakefield as well as Kirklees and Calderdale. And we've then got road closures as part of TRU, the closing the B6118 Combe Bridge Road with something like I think it's a 14-mile detour for HGVs then that'll have to go into Huddersfield and round. We need to be looking at that and seeing how these are meshing together, because, again, everything that we've said about congestion, air pollution, things like that, if we've got two major projects ongoing impacting on the same highway network, someone needs to have a look at that. And again, in James's ward, the works that are going to be ongoing on the A62, the road bridge there. So there's lots of impacts and two major strands that I hope somebody's got an overarching view of that goes, you know, goodness me, because we've seen some road surfacing works in Cooper Bridge at the moment. Simultaneously, Network Rail have been closing off adjacent roads while they do bridge inspections. And the other day, it took the deputy leader of Kirklees and a colleague 35 minutes to do 2 miles in a car. Obviously, you could probably walked it or cycled it faster, but I'll let somebody else tell Cathy she can do that.
Councillor.
Just a little update for you, and I'm sure Martin is fully aware that the public inquiry is taking place now. All the disagreements, as it were, or all the concerns that Kirklees had with the TransPennine upgrade, in fact has, with side agreements, all been resolved, and so we have withdrawn our objections to the TransPennine. Though the upgrade, though the inquiry continues and is due to finish on the 3rd of December. So we just have to watch this space.
Chair, just to build on what Councillor Firth is saying in response to Councillor Bolt, as Councillor Firth says, the public inquiry for the TransPennine route upgrade is now underway. The Combined Authority also had some concerns around the provisions in the Act and has secured agreements with Network Rail to safeguard particularly the work in the tunnel underneath Huddersfield Bus Station, so that it safeguards the operation and the redevelopment of Huddersfield Bus Station. But what we've also been doing in that process, as have Kirklees officers, is securing some protocols with Network Rail about how we will deal with the disruption in the wider sense, so that we've got mechanisms to be able to address the things that Councillor Bolt raises in terms of the potential road disruption and public and bus disruption and other things that will come from TIU and how they link in with other schemes. So we've got that process has been actually very useful to establish some processes which we can use going forward.
So disruption at local road level is often managed by the local authorities in our experience. But obviously, from a rail point of view, Great British Railways hopefully will be the guiding mind, working with local combined authorities to make sure that works in future. But without that guiding mind at the moment, government don't always make a logical decision about the right thing at the right time, and that does put us in a bit of a difficult position. It'd be nice to know what was in the IRP for a start. Yeah, I think we're better at it at local and combined authority, don't you think? We're just more connected with our communities and obviously in charge of our briefs and can connect the two. Councillor Garbutt, did you want to...
Thank you, Chair. It's in respect to the second platform at Castleford. What's the expectation of the increased usage of the capacity on the railways?
Yes, if you have...
It is part of TIU, but I think it's looking very favourable that we will get that second platform at Castleford. We've had good assurances around that, which will make a huge difference. Yes.
So it's
well, not necessarily. It's like, you know, it depends on funding, doesn't it? But
yes, just to clarify, as Councillor Grove was saying, as a sort of spin-off of the TransPennine route upgrade, the works look like they're going to include bringing the second platform, Castleford, back into operation, partly because Castleford is a diversionary route for the trains while some of that work's going on. As Councillor Groves has said, and she and I have had conversations with rail industry people as well, is that what we want to do is actually maximise the benefit of that, so that we perhaps have some through trains through say between York and Wakefield via Castleford and those sort of things. It opens up some opportunities. So whilst TransPennine route upgrade doesn't in itself bring those extra trains into Castleford, it absolutely does give that sort of infrastructure that we could build on.
It just shows why transport infrastructure is so important, isn't it? Because it's not just about speed and connectivity, it's about capacity to do other routes, and I think that was a very, very good benefit there. Councillor Sunderland?
Thank you, Chair. There's a lot to welcome in this from Calderdale's perspective in terms of our links east, but also importantly for us, our links west. And a lot of the projects in other districts, such as TIU, are very important to us. And I particularly note works around Bradford Station, Bradford Interchange, that entry and exit arrangement being improved there, which could shave a few minutes off, would actually be really transformative for that line. But one of the things we've had constant promises on since 2010 is the electrification of the Calder Valley line. And at one point we were top of the list of lines to get electrified, and we're still waiting, and it often goes quite quiet. I really do appreciate that Wicker continues to value this, and it's always there in the reports as a priority. I wondered if there was any update as to where we might be on the electrification of that line, or are the government still holding quiet on it?
So if we get Northern Powerhouse Rail going through Bradford on the IRP, we also get electrification on that first bit of the Calder Valley line as well. So I think that is a real win for us as a region if we can get that. I don't know, Dave, did you want to add something to that?
I think that's the extent of our understanding. Everything's waiting for the IRP, and then we'll see where it sits from there.
Big smile on my face, and you too will as well, Councillor Sunderland, if we get that announcement next week or the week after.
So will my grandkids when it's built, maybe.
It is all legacy stuff, isn't it? I mean, a lot of the transport stuff we discuss isn't going to happen to 1-2 years, but that's not what we do this for, is it? It's to change the future as well as the present. So that's the wonderful nature of our role here. So any other questions or comments on this? We obviously asked to look at the consultation proposals, which seem pretty reasonable, really. We're going to have something in January, something in March with this committee. Councillor Groves?
I'm just wondering on the back of Councillor Sutherland's comment, if it was first on the list, I think that might maybe before my time. It should be in the decarbonisation strategy of Network Rail for 2050. So there was a list produced. So I think we need to look at that list and see where Calder Valley is. Hopefully we will get the funding through the IRP. But if it's not, I think we've got to go back and challenge that, if it's dropped down, and find out why.
So if we don't get it, I will be very cross. And obviously our future on rail is very interconnected, so I'm sure you'll be cross alongside us in Bradford. Good. So are everybody all right with the proposal about the workshops? Yeah. So in that case, can I ask that we accept the recommendations? I'm happy to propose those. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you very much. Super, that is carried. And moving on now then to the Bus Enhanced Partnership. And it's quite exciting times on buses really, because things are, we can see again into the future a vision to get greater control of buses, which will then complement other modes of transport across the region. We'll get more out of them and more inclusivity, go to more places, as Councillor Homewood was saying before, very important for us. Is it Helen to present on this paper? Or Dave?
I'll start, then Helen can add into it as well. I think just to put this report into context first, we have at various meetings discussed the bus service improvement plan. That was submitted as per the government's deadline at the end of October, so it was submitted last week. And so that's why the appendix, because it's a bidding document, wasn't available with the papers, but is now. So happy to take any further questions, but hopefully you'll have seen and felt sort of part of a process of getting us to that particular point in terms of submitting the bus service improvement plan. And we await the outcome in terms of funding. But what it does do is it sets the template for how and articulates, probably for the first time, what the ambition is for the bus service in West Yorkshire. And then we then look to see how we can apply the various different ways in which we can deliver that, both in terms of funding, but also in terms of how the governance works. So that's step one, if you like, into a bit of a process. To get any funding from government, the local transport authorities have got to be either in a bus enhanced partnership or well down the process of establishing a franchising scheme. And so back in June, the Combined Authority took the decision to both develop an enhanced partnership with bus operators and local councils, but also to start exploring the business case around franchising. And so that was a process that's underway now. The next stage in the process is for us to start putting the detail around the bus enhanced partnership, and that's why this report's here to you. because we've got to be in an enhanced partnership by the 1st of April to be able to attract any funding from the Department of Transport. So we're to a certain extent in a set of timescales that are set for us, both by government in saying you've got to be in an enhanced partnership by the 1st of April, but also by the legislation and guidance that sits around enhanced partnership, which I have to say are quite complex, as this report sort of illustrates. So, so the two significant components of an enhanced partnership. There's an enhanced partnership plan, which is a strategic document, and essentially the bus service improvement plan sets the basis for that, as well as how we would establish a partnership governance that brings the bus operators, the combined authority and the councils together to manage that. And to a certain extent, we've developed that through the Bus Alliance, West Yorkshire Bus Alliance, which Councillor Groves has chaired over the last couple of years, and that will sort of morph into an enhanced partnership governance, and we've got a bus service improvement plan, which is the plan which we're delivering. So the enhanced partnership plan is fairly well set out, I think, in terms of what we're going to need to do. The enhanced partnership schemes are a little bit more technical in the sense that they relate to and they almost contractualise the infrastructure investment the public sector is making with the bus and the private sector investment that the bus companies are bringing. And so what we're now in the process of, we've got to be in at least one enhanced partnership scheme. So we're in the process of sort of working that up as a proposition. So we're sort of sharing this as the timescales and the development with you today. And we're sort of working towards having something in place for March. So we will do some more work on this in terms of the structure and process, present that to the Combined Authority in December. We then have some set processes of engagement and consultation which we need to go through, and then we'll bring back the outcome of that to this committee early in the new year, ahead of a final decision by the Combined Authority to make the scheme in February, I think, is probably where we'll end up. So, we're now in a process, and I think this report's sort of setting out what that process is for you.
Thank you, and I want to thank Councillor Groves for all the work she's done on this. I know it's a big piece of work pulling it together, and I think it shows our ambition, scale of what we want to achieve in the region, so I think it's really welcome. Question is how we're going to get everything we want, and I suppose we talked earlier in the meeting about low levels of usage coming back, and actually some bus routes being cut, and what I don't want us to get is just to fulfil what we're doing anyway. We do want to achieve that ambition and put in more routes and more accessibility for people who may not have had a good bus service before. Any questions or comments? And obviously this is something that we've discussed quite frequently. Councillor Firth?
It's just the ambition that you just mentioned, Chair, and obviously we all welcome this. And there's just a little paragraph in there that's saying that all buses in West Yorkshire will be Euro 6 by 2026. Is that an ambition, or have we got some milestones? Is it achievable, and is the funding there?
So how's Zebra doing?
Helen?
I'll pick up on the zero emission bus bid, which is what Councillor Hinchcliffe has just referenced. So we are in the process of formulating our response to that bid. What that will bring, if we are successful, would be over 120 new zero emission buses into West Yorkshire, starting from later next year. This is the bid is done in partnership with the operators. So we will submit. Based upon our expression of interest that we submitted earlier this year. Just to pick up on your Euro kind of Euro 6 requirement, so part of our bus service improvement plan, we have set out our targets for where we want to be in terms of emissions. Within there, we are saying that we want all buses across West Yorkshire to be Euro 6 or better by 2026.
Back in the paragraph I've read, commitment to a carbo zero bus fleet by 2036, but it's by Euro standards, Euro 6 standards by 2026. So there's a 10-year gap to deliver what you've just mentioned. But if we can get to Euro 6 standard by 2026, that's a remarkable achievement. And I just hope it's just not a pipe dream that is possible.
So I suppose the reassurance Councillor Firth is looking there, is it achievable? Are we confident that ambition is achievable?
So we want to set standards to try and stretch ourselves and the operators, and it's to focus minds to try and enable that to happen.
I think it would be a combination of new buses and retrofitted buses, and I think, as we've said in these meetings before, we have had some specific funds to retrofit buses and been quite successful in doing that, and that's been focused on the clean air zones in Leeds and Bradford so far. So to a certain extent, some of this would be using funding we would get to expand that to the rest of West Yorkshire.
Answer your question, Councillor Firth. It's a
No,
smart
it's just
objective.
It's a commitment that's been made by our Mayor, Tracy, and if it's a commitment, it's a commitment, and I just hope.
I think I say it's a smart objective, so it's measurable, achievable, but realistic and targeted. So we have to have a certain ambition, don't we, and make sure we achieve that. So it focuses all the minds on making sure it happens. And Councillor Bolt, did you want to come on this as well?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And like everybody else here, welcome this going forward. As you said, more routes. Let's hope that we can get some more routes that are serving people and encourage them to get out. A couple of points that I picked up in here. The devil being in the detail. On page 115, 2.16, Phase 1. Initial focus is on one EP scheme. Helen nodding. So which scheme is it, Helen? Because obviously, if you've got one scheme, as you would do to trial it, that means that potentially the districts are not getting the benefits from that one. I think part of the partnership talked about the combined authority putting something into it, and I would hope that would mean that on major highway schemes that the authority are funding, there is either bus priority measures are included or a very good reason why on something like the £77 million Cooper Bridge scheme, which both Calder and Kirklees are putting forward, there are no bus lanes being included in that. They talk about having transponders on a bus, but as I mentioned the other day at scrutiny, if you are on a bus coming out of Huddersfield when the football club's been playing, you've got a job on to get to the front of the queue, waiting for it to go red. I welcome as well the Merrill Pledge, which is on page 11 of the appendix, something that we've spoken about before, which talks about the last bus promise, last journey promise. Something, again, that we need to get the publicity out there. And, again, we just need to revisit the wording in this. If the last bus of the service of the day is late or cancelled, we will pay for a taxi to get you where you want to go. There's a difference between we will pay for a taxi and we will reimburse your taxi costs. If a bus doesn't turn up and I'm stood in the wilds of Dewsbury somewhere and a taxi turns up and I get in and say, Tracy's paying, is the taxi driver going to know what this means, that it's the last bus pledge? So we need to get the communication out and we need to get the wording right.
Okay. Can I just say, obviously a Kirklees issue is Cooper Bridge, so I'll just bring Councillor Firth on that and then revert to the officers for your other point.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bolt is well aware about the problems with Cooper Bridge and the space at Cooper Bridge. And there's simply no room to put a bus lane in. There will be transponders, as we say, in our buses, which will make a significant difference. But as that is wheeled out, and we have some time off, actually, submitting the scheme to WICA, because it is a WICA funded scheme and it has to go through the business case and all the gateways. And I'm sure that will be discussed ad infinitum, as it has been for the last number of years, as Martin well knows. It's a difficult junction, as we all know, and constrained by land availability. But we will certainly come up with a wonderful scheme which will hopefully suit, well, nearly everyone. Thank you, Chair.
I mean, I think also it's a Kirklees issue, but I think there's a wider point that actually road surfaces are in future going to have to take a lot of different modes of transport, and given our topography, we don't always, looking at Calderdale, we don't always have the room to put everything in. I forgot what the number was, it 20 metres or something to put everything in if you want walking, cycling, bus, segregation, tram, etc., etc. And we are going to have to make some difficult decisions going forward about, you know, which modes have priority on certain roads and which don't. And you just physically, you can't fit them all in, can you? Councillor Groves, did you want to come in?
Just on Councillor Bolt's point, I just want to, you know, sort of thank all the executive members who have this portfolio, because for the first time ever, we've got a pipeline of bus priority corridors that if we can get the funding, we can get them into place. And that will make such a huge difference. But I have to say, all these schemes that I see right across West Yorkshire, most of the interventions are there, and everybody is trying to work towards the best possible outcome from this.
And then, Dave, do you want to come in on the other points of Councillor Bolt?
Yes, the 2 points, I think, on Councillor Bolt's questions. The arrangements for enhanced partnerships are very much a sort of work in progress with the government as well. So we only got the latest set of guidance as to how to sort of frame a enhanced partnership scheme 2 days ago, I think it was right. So to a certain extent, we're sort of working with what we're getting. I think the one of the obligation that we're under is to have at least one scheme. I think one of the things that we are thinking around is that whilst the enhanced partnership plan will essentially encapsulate the bus service improvement plan and all of the sort of holistic aspects of things, the schemes are going to be quite specific, and it might be more appropriate to actually apply schemes as something we apply to some infrastructure we are building or have just built, and to start with that process, because essentially what that does is contractualise the infrastructure that's been built with the vehicles and the operation of services on it. So it may be that we start quite small in that respect with something that's recently finished, but we're sort of working through our options there. On the second point, I think Councillor Bolt has pointed out a slight inconsistency in our wording, if I'm absolutely honest. We actually introduced that last bus promise a year or two ago, and been sort of working with it. And what it actually means is that if the last bus doesn't operate and somebody has to get a taxi, then they do claim the money back, and that's how that works. I wouldn't like to administer it the other way around.
Okay, that clears that up. Any more questions or comments on this? Obviously, it's been submitted. Councillor Bolt, again.
Just to come back, I mean, the Cooper Bridge scheme, Chair, it's not a Kirklees scheme, it's a West Yorkshire scheme. It's been funded by, and the road that I was talking about on the approach to Cooper Bridge is actually in Calderdale. As you come down across the River Calder to Cooper Bridge, the existing road and the widened to 4 lanes is firmly in Calderdale. So there's an extra lane going in, and it comes back to what we were talking about the transport strategy. 25% more increase in bus and 21% decrease in cars. If the bus is sharing the road space, I mean, it's the discussion we had with colleagues in London about their low transport. Yeah, someone has to start moving forward to that. And if we wait until we've got the cars off the road before we put the buses on them, yeah, there's a chicken and egg there, Chair.
Thank you. I'll take that as a comment. So, anything else on this paper then before we move on? No? Lovely. So, I think we just asked to recommend the workshops we're on here. So, have I gone the right one? Let me just check. I've just turned over a little bit too soon. Let me just check.
I think, Chair, what we're looking for, the committee is to endorse the approach in developing the enhanced partnership,
yes.
And then we'll bring the timescales and the process, and then we'll bring the content and detail back to the committee.
Thank you. Is everybody happy with that recommendation? Please show. Thank you very much. I think people are happy with that. Right, moving on now, because I'm already on that paper. So, Leeds City Region Transport Update. Obviously, there's a few things on here which are around transport for the north, and the key routes network, which obviously came to the last meeting, and Manchester Recovery Task Force. So was this you, Dave, again, was it, or Helen? Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've really kind of brought out the main things here. So the paper's just summarising the latest Transport for the North Board and the Rail North Committee and calls through that. It's also just providing an update on the City Region Sustainable Transport settlement announcement that came through the Saturday before the spending review. So part of the spending review announced in advance. That basically set out that we submitted a bid to our low and our high scenario was requested by government, our high scenario being 920 million, and we've received 830 million through that settlement. We are now in the process of responding to government's timescales, whereby we need to develop a programme business case to set out how we're going to spend that 830 million.
Can I just point of clarification? It's 830 million, but actually a lot of it was money we'd already got. It's about 317 million, isn't it? I think that we'd already. So it's repackaging of some money. It's not all new money.
Yeah, it's worth probably taking this opportunity to clarify that. We think of the 830 million, around 400 million is new money.
We're always grateful for anything coming out of central government, shall I say, but we just need to be really clear and honest about what's new money and what isn't. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The City Region Update paper also talks through the West Yorkshire Climate, or gives an update, shall we say, on the West Yorkshire Climate Environment Plan, and just a summary of the key route network that came to this meeting last time. The next thing was that there was just to tell the wider committee that there was the rail expert panel at the start of October, which had some good discussion around some of the content that's come into the Transport Committee paper today. Yeah, they are really the main things that have come through that over and above what's been talked through. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Been through some of these things already and in previous meetings. No? Well, in that case, just we note the report, so thank you very much for that. And then we move on to summary of transport schemes. So this obviously is this transport schemes that have gone through the Place and Regeneration Committee recently. So they have been scrutinised elsewhere, but does anybody have any comments or questions on these? No, I can't see many indicating. So in that case, we just note that report. And I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming here today. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. Councillor Garbutt, do you want to just come here? Thank you. But otherwise, everybody else can go. That's it. That's it. It's over. Thank you very much.